New York, New York. It is arguably still the preeminent global financial center. As far as money and media go, it's the city that's the world headquarters for both. And so perhaps the title Center of the World is fitting. But here's an unpleasant reality less talked about. While New York, both the city and the state, were centers of the abolitionist struggle to finally end slavery, it was actually enslaved Africans that built the infrastructure of the colonial city. And it was that way from the 1600s to 1827, when slavery was legally abolished in New York City. We rarely think of New York as a slave-holding city, but it had more slaves than any other city except Charleston, South Carolina. It's inconvenient, uncomfortable, and for some shameful. Perhaps that's why many shy away from talking about it. But not Alan Singer, who's lived in New York all his life.
Recognize the hardness of their life, and then the people, about 500 people who are dug up, are then reinterred in a ceremony in these mounds. So these mounds contain about the remains of 500 people who originally were buried out through that whole area.
Singer says that at the time of the American Revolution, around the 1780s, the population of New York was about 10,000. 15% of that population were enslaved Africans.
It's Domino Sugar. Domino Sugar, owned by the mayor of the city of New York, is producing sugar in the Caribbean, and it's being processed in Brooklyn and distributed around the world.
Another New York mayor, Fernando Wood, who later becomes a congressman, opposed and campaigned heavily against the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which abolished slavery. It wasn't just the sugar trade, it was also cotton. Singer writes in his book, the founders of Brown Brothers Harriman built their bank by lending millions of dollars to Southern planters and arranging for the shipment and sale of slave-grown cotton. When the bank took control of 3 Louisiana plantations at one point, it also got 346 enslaved Africans. John Jacob Astor, America's first multimillionaire, made his fortune in part through cotton transportation. He was also part of the slave trade. The Waldorf Astoria Hotel and neighborhoods in New York City are named after him. Lehman Brothers, a merchandising business that quickly evolved into a cotton brokerage firm, is another example. And finally, Charles L. Tiffany, who got the financing to open a fancy goods store from his father, who operated a cotton mill in Connecticut using cotton picked by Southern slave labor. Tiffany & Co., the internationally renowned jeweler, was born. The list goes on. Today, the South Street Seaport is one of New York's many waterfront tourist attractions, with restaurants and gift shops. Back in June, New York Mayor Bill de Blasio dedicated this plaque steps away from what was once the Wall Street slave market. The plaque honors those who passed through the slave market, located near Pearl and Water Streets. During a memorial, the mayor
Dios te bendice, hija. Dios te bendice. Dios os perdona y os ama a todos. Ala, que Dios os perdona. os perdona. Dios os perdona a todos.
Por favor, mi princesita africana. Por favor.
Enséñame este baile.
Esto tampoco no le das nada. No me toques. Estas sí están bien. Mira. Tampoco esta tómala. Están sanas.
Este está enfermo, no le des nada. Dales comida solo a los que están sanos.
Vea. Esto sí, sí.
¡Esta! ¡Esta no! ¡Esta! ¡Esta no! ¡Esta no! ¡Una esta! Háblala.
300. ¿Está todo bien?
Sí, todo bien.
Boachi. Boachi.
Comment ça, merde? 放弃完，把屋里老板白了。I made more money to show you that money ain't nothing. It's our money, nigga. It's our country. It's like stolen from us. It's pyramids, nigga. It's pyramids. It's St. Louis, nigga, Missouri. They stole it. All the shit. America just the latest bitch that been ran through so many times. The Greeks hit her. Mansa Musa hit her. We had her. The Indians and shit. The motherfucking pilgrims. It's the Jews. They dress the same. It's the same shit. That's the story. They put us in the school. The Rothschilds. I know Jay-Z back here like, they go down now.
You've heard the anti-Semitic tropes. Jews run the banks, Jews manipulate space lasers, Jews pull the strings and make world leaders dance. What role did Jews play in the transatlantic slave trade?
The red are the executives that are Jewish.
Hey guys, welcome to episode 3. So in the previous episode, you got to know Sabtai Zevi. Now we're covering Sabtai Zevi was in Turkey. How did the Jewish community end up in Turkey? So as you may know from our Africa-Palestine episode, you might be aware that during 1492 on the Iberian Peninsula, the Spaniards and the Catholic Church kicked out a lot of Jews and Nigerian Moors, which ended up being the people that were enslaved. They were part of the transatlantic slave trade. It was mainly Moors, Islamic Moors that were of African descent. But and there was also some African tribes people and some that weren't necessarily part of the Moorish Empire, but that's pretty much who covered West Africa. Since Mansa Musa and his reign in the 13th century, it was mainly Islamic Africans on the west coast of Africa. But in 1492, they also not only kicked out the Moors, they kicked out the Sephardic Jews, the Sephardim. These Jews were given two options when they were kicked out. They were either able to, three options technically. They were able to either be relocated within the Ottoman Empire because the Ottomans had took Constantinople, Rome lost it, and Rome was pissed. But the Ottomans said, hey, Jewish community, you can come in here, you can be safe. The other option that they had was to go into the Netherlands. This was the second option. So some of them fled into the Dutch Empire and went up to the Netherlands and settled. So, and the third option would be for them to convert to Christianity and be allowed to stay within Spain and Portugal. And that worked out for quite a little bit, maybe 10 years, and then eventually I think the Portuguese had decided they wanted to expel certain Jews that were just staying as Jews but claiming that they were Jewish. These type of Jews we call crypto Jews. So a crypto Jew is someone that professes that they're Christian on the outside, or that they're a Baha'i if you're part of the Baha'i religion. That's one of those weird religions where you can be a part of another group. You can be a Freemason, but you can also be called a Baha'i, which is why they got outlawed in Iran. But anyhow, you can claim to be a part of one group, and underneath your intentions are you actually hold a different belief. So you're actually subverting and you're being disingenuous with what your intentions are. So there were a lot of crypto Jews, and Christopher Columbus was one of these crypto Jews, as you may know. So that explains for you guys how Sabtai Zevi and the Jewish community ended up in Turkey. And out of that whole bloodline, that ended up causing the Armenian genocide, that ended up causing the Bolsheviks, that ended up causing a lot of issues because of Sabtai Zevi, his belief system, and the relocation of that particular, turn of events in Turkey. So yeah, to get on to what we're going into now, you're going to find out that Columbus was a Sephardic Jew. And so the Sephardim that were in Portugal and Spain, because Europe had a massive sugarcane addiction, and we covered that on other episodes of Dudes Brewing, which sparked the transatlantic slave trade. You're going to find out about the hidden hand in the transatlantic slave trade. As you can see, this is a Masonic type thing that they do, because the hidden hand is the finances. It's the finances because money knows no bounds. It's not bounded by religion. It's not bounded by belief system, which means whoever is controlling the finances, the Rothschilds and different banking families from particular groups, whoever controls the finances, they kind of control the planet because they have no moral compass. Finances doesn't have a boundary. So as long as there's a monetary system in place, there's an incentive to disadvantage the planet. So the hidden hand within the transatlantic slave trade was the Jewish community's involvement in it, handling the merchant, the sailing, and the transport of Africans. Sit back and enjoy.
Every December, in the Netherlands and Belgium, a beloved mythical character comes to life. He's the companion of Sinterklaas, and his job is to deliver gifts to children. This is Zwarte Piet, or Black Pete. But what makes Zwarte Piet controversial is that he's portrayed by a person in blackface. Let's stop here for a minute. We'll come back to Zwarte Piet and why he's still a part of Dutch celebrations in a bit.
2,000 years ago, the German god Wodan drove around on a white horse with 2 black raven who eavesdropped on people through the chimney and tattled to their boss. That sounds familiar. And throughout history there have been traditions where people paint themselves black around New Year's to impersonate the devil or to scare the kids. Ta-da! And then we have Saint Nicholas, who visits Dutch and Belgian households around December 5th.
Hello.
At first he drops in alone. Well, him and his horse, of course. But in 1850 he gets a companion. That's when the storybook Saint Nicholas and His Servant appears. In these pictures we see our good saint accompanied for the first time by a somewhat dark-skinned employee. Not that strange, really, because in those days many distinguished people had coloured servants. And by hiring this minion, Saint Nick can focus on his core business as a friend to all children, while his subordinate manages the old-fashioned bag and rob. At first, the black assistant is an idiot who can't even speak properly. But slowly he evolves into a power Pete. The sometimes somewhat distracted good saint grows dependent on his skilled management assistant. And whether or not Pete is black from all that soot or not, it just wouldn't be the same without him.
Blackface is one of the most controversial costumes out there, and in recent years, there have been many who've come under fire for choosing to wear blackface.
I'd kill myself if I were black.
Oh, you can say whatever you want, you smelling.
People who wore blackface at some point in their careers were suddenly facing consequences.
It's not racist on Halloween, it's racist every day. There is no magical day where you can wear blackface with no repercussions?
I never should have done it. It is something absolutely unacceptable to do.
Blackface is racist because it turns black people into a costume and divorces them from their humanity. We're people, not costumes.
Let's get back to Zwarte Piet. He wears brightly colored Renaissance attire, curly afro wigs, exaggerated red lips, and gold jewelry. He comes to the Netherlands from Spain by steamboat as the helper of Sinterklaas. He is mischievous, playful, and helpful, checking whether children have been naughty or nice, giving sweets and gifts to the good children, and a bundle of birch branches to chastise naughty children. And in case we forgot to mention it before, Zwarte Piet has dark skin. Typically, a white actor will darken his skin for this role, making himself appear black. But for a region with such a small percentage of African population, why is this character black? The character's origins are not entirely clear, but some sources suggest that Zwarte Piet was initially meant to represent a Moor from Spain. The Moors were a Muslim population of North African and Iberian descent, who ruled parts of the Iberian Peninsula, mainly modern-day Spain and Portugal, from the early 8th until the late 15th century. Zwarte Piet might have been influenced by 19th century European views and stereotypes of Moors and people of African descent. The Moors were not slaves, but conquerors and settlers who had significant influence on the culture, science, philosophy, and architecture of the region. However, during and after the Reconquista, the period of history where Christian kingdoms retook control of the Iberian Peninsula, many Moors were enslaved or expelled from Spain and Portugal. The more modern version of Zwarte Piet, popularized by Jan Schenkman in his book St. Nicholas and His Servant, shows Zwarte Piet as a dark-skinned helper dressed in page boy attire. Given the history of colonialism and slavery at that point in history, some interpretations associated Zwarte Piet with the caricature of enslaved Africans. Blackface has a long history of being used to mock, dehumanize, and perpetuate negative stereotypes about people of African descent. This practice originated in 19th century minstrel shows in the United States, where white performers would darken their skin and exaggerate their features to caricature black people, often depicting them as lazy, unintelligent, or criminal. The use of blackface contributed to the marginalization and mistreatment of black communities. There have been protests and campaigns to alter or eliminate the character from the holiday celebrations due to these concerns. In response to this criticism, some in the Netherlands and Belgium have started adapting the character by, for example, replacing the blackface makeup with soot smudges. This version is called Sooty Piet, and his black face is caused by going down chimneys to give children gifts, much like Santa Claus. But while many have called for the cancellation of Zwarte Piet, there are others who argue that he is a harmless and beloved children's character, and that the blackface portrayal is not meant to be a racial caricature. They claim it is an important part of their cultural heritage and see the criticisms as an attack on their tradition.
The Kingdom of the Netherlands, a reasonably small country in today's Central Europe, whose only other possessions today are 3 Caribbean islands, Curaçao, Aruba, and Sint Maarten, with a population of around 17.4 million people. But the Dutch overseas possessions were much larger throughout history, and they once had a significant role as one of the main European colonizer powers. The map I used on the thumbnail and the one here is a little misleading because it is an anachronous map. This means that these are all the possessions the Dutch Empire had at any time overlapped, meaning they never held all of these at the same time. But still, for the purpose of this video and to make it more interesting, I'm going to follow the idea that all lands which were at any time under Dutch rule decided to reunite in current days. It would spread across almost all continents in the world, from New Amsterdam in North America to the Dutch Guianas, Dutch Brazil, and territories in today's Ghana, South Africa, India, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, and Taiwan, not to mention the many trade outposts they established throughout the African coast, India, Southeast Asia, China, and Japan, and some apparently even in the coast of Chile in South America. On top of that, we also have to assume that their rule over the Benelux region would also have maintained itself, or would once again be a reality, and they would therefore also rule Belgium, and Luxembourg in Europe. Now, it goes without saying that this scenario is absolutely and totally impossible. This is definitely just a what-if hypothetical scenario with no likelihood of ever happening. But I think it's interesting and fun to think about, especially because looking at the union of the territories with our current reality allows us to understand the size and dimension that certain empires, in this case the Dutch, really had at their peak. Before checking how the renewed empire would be like in modern days, let's quickly summarize how the Dutch Empire came to be and how it reached all of these places. The Dutch Empire divided itself into two areas: the East Indies in Oceania and Asia, and the West Indies in America. Africa, I think, was divided along the two. It also divided itself into two methods throughout both of these areas: the establishment of true colonies with large territorial rule, and the mere establishment of trade factories or fortresses to use the trade routes and have a presence in those regions. So let's take a quick look region by region to understand which areas they ruled and which areas would now become a part of the empire again should the impossible ever happen. In Africa, most of their presence was through these trade factories, essentially military and economical outposts that existed throughout the African coast. However, they did have some territorial exploration and colonies per se. In South Africa, they briefly ruled the Cape of Good Hope and surrounding areas before losing them to the British. In West Africa, they held the Dutch Gold Coast in Ghana, a part of Angola, Senegal, and the island of Arguin off the coast of Mauritania. In East Africa, they controlled the island of Mauritius near Madagascar. In Asia, their presence was gigantic, and although it was also mainly through trading posts, they also held significant land. The most obvious cases are Indonesia, of course, Ceylon, and Taiwan, but they also had actual colonies in India. Coromandel and its coast was the major Dutch colony on the mainland. It grew from the fort at Pulicat, captured from the Portuguese in 1609. In fact, many of the Dutch colonies throughout America, Africa, or Asia were captured and taken from the Portuguese. In most, if not all cases, during the time when Spain briefly ruled Portugal. The Dutch were at war with the Spanish, and since the Spanish cared more about their own empire than the Portuguese one, they left Portuguese colonies mostly undefended, and the Dutch took the opportunity to seize them. The rest of their Asian empire consisted mostly of those trading outposts in Iraq, Iran, Pakistan, Yemen, Bangladesh, Oman, Burma, Thailand, Malaysia, Cambodia, Vietnam, China, and also Madagascar. So I don't know how any of these would now join a modern Dutch empire, since their presence in those regions was mostly a group of buildings. Maybe the city in which they were in could join, and the empire would have a network of small city-states throughout the world. In America, they also had significant possessions. New Netherlands consisted of parts of today's US regions of Albany and the state of New York, and the city of New York itself in Manhattan, at the time, New Amsterdam. They also ruled the Dutch Antilles in the Caribbean, and this would today give them ownership of many islands, although they still currently have some of them. St. Martin, the Virgin Islands, Aruba, Curaçao, and Tobago would be among these. In South America, they held Suriname, part of Guyana, and New Holland, which was Dutch Brazil. Again, a group of territories captured during the Iberian Union. It's interesting because this capture was a part of a plan the Dutch had called the Grand Design, in which they aimed to capture strategic locations from the Portuguese and Spanish in order to control the main trade goods and routes, such as sugar, for instance, thus eliminating Spanish profits and making it so that they would have no money to continue the war against them. It's a smart strategy. Even if your enemy has a much stronger army and navy than you don't need to defeat it in combat. You just need to make sure the army collapses through any other means, such as lack of money to sustain it. There were also brief expeditions and trading posts in Chile. Back in Europe, they would hold Belgium and Luxembourg, and in Oceania, they also apparently had a claim on Western Australia and Tasmania. Although no real attempt of colonization was ever made, a lot of places along the Australian coast have Dutch names, and Tasmania used to be called Van Diemen's Land. So if this impossible scenario were to happen, it's hard to tell how all of these regions would now become part of the same empire. The entire countries which they ruled, sure, those could become a part of it. Sri Lanka, Taiwan, Indonesia, Luxembourg, Belgium, and all the islands in the Caribbean and elsewhere. But what about the partial possessions they had? Would the state of New York and Albany suddenly join them, or only part of the state? And would the other partial possessions in Brazil, South Africa, India, Angola, Ghana, and Senegal split from their own countries to join the Dutch? The scenario itself is already totally impossible, but the logistics of it make it even more absolutely crazy and unachievable, not to mention the tons of trading outposts they had. I think these would just have to be ignored, because otherwise there would just be small neighborhoods in each country that randomly belonged to the Dutch, like that weird Belgian exclave that actually exists inside the Netherlands. So in terms of size, it's very difficult to calculate exactly, but this new empire would certainly become one of the top 10 countries in the world in terms of size, even with just the full countries they used to rule. Indonesia alone is already in 14th place, so it wouldn't be difficult. It would also become the only country/union in the world with possessions and a presence in 4 or even 5 continents. But because of this, its culture would also be incredibly different throughout the regions. Each place has their local identity, even if there might be some small or large influence due to Dutch presence at some point in their history. They also have very different religions. Indonesia is mostly Muslim, while the Netherlands are Protestant, and some other territories are Roman Catholic. Now, a lot of countries have diverse religions within them, even some off this list, and in secular states, it really doesn't matter which religion each person chooses to follow, because it doesn't, as it shouldn't, affect state policy.
Okay, so that was a sanitized version of how the Dutch East and Dutch West companies operated. But I think you guys need to know just how deep this rabbit hole goes regarding the Jewish involvement in the slave trade, and why New York City, New York, is the epicenter of all of this. And who built Wall Street? What exactly Wall Street was built off of? So the Dutch created the what was called the poppy boom. There was not poppy. The Dutch created what was called the tulip craze. And tulips were the first thing that became this huge, I would say, spark and boom, market boom, and it had a value that went up and a value that went down. So the idea of a marketplace, as far as the I would say the precursor to the Wall Street, would have been the whole tulip craze. And that was created in the Netherlands by Dutch financial companies and so many Dutch Ashkenazi Jews. And some that were Sephardim got very wealthy off this, but mainly Ashkenazi. And so I think it's important to know that that's how the Dutch community moved into the merchant aspects of trading, and why trade ended up going global. As I said, partially due to a lack of sugarcane. The Dutch East and Dutch West Indian Company were the world's first multinational companies. And multinational was because they had set up ports in multiple different countries, because they went into their land and said, we're taking it. So that would be, they set up ports, in all the map that you would have just seen in general. But like in China, they got China heavily addicted to opium from them going in and trying to take advantage of China with Silk Road exchange. That was actually the first drug dealing. The very first multinational drug deal came from the Dutch East Indian Company, but the Dutch West Indian Company focused on the transport of Africans, slave trading, pretty much behind sugarcane, fur, and cotton, and other resources as well. But those are the most prominent ones. So sit back and enjoy yourselves.
Guess who runs the United States? Everyone says, oh, it's the Rockefellers. It's the Collins family. Now, who are the Collins? Well, there's a fellow called Christopher Columbus, who in Spanish is called Cristóbal Colón. He came from one of the papal families called the Colonna family, and they were the enemies of the Orsini family, who considered themselves to be the Maxima family. The Rothschilds and the Windsors come from the Orsini family. The Orsini and the Colonna were fighting in the Middle Ages to be popes. One pope finally comes along in history and says, right, you've got to stop stop this fighting amongst yourselves. He said, one of your family has to marry one of their family, and you have to make amends, and we have to make a papal bull, and we have to work together. And from then on, the Collins family becomes Columbia, District of Columbia, the Knights of Columbus, Columbia Pictures, British Columbia, Columbia in South America, and the Collins family still runs America. Thank you, Christopher Collins, otherwise known as Christopher Columbus.
1476, off the coast of Portugal. An Italian sailor, shipwrecked and left for dead by pirates. His name? Christopher Columbus. A dreamer who will unite a divided world. He believes he's been saved by God for a special purpose. His dream is inspired by a book written 200 years earlier, but thanks to the printing press has become a bestseller. After the Bible, the most widely read book in Europe. The Wonders of the World by Marco Polo. The epic story of a Venetian merchant in his travels east. Through the Holy Lands, Central Asia, and on to the exotic teeming cities of China.
It is scarcely possible to set down in writing the magnificence of this province. Here they weave gold tissues, as well as every other kind of silk and cloth. The city contains merchants of great wealth and an incalculable number of people.
Columbus was a classic example of someone who really was inspired by literature and dreamed big.
He's possessed with this, kind of desire to win the lottery of life. He wanted to be the next Marco Polo.
Columbus's brother is a map maker. Together, they plot a revolutionary idea. To head east by traveling west. Not over land like Marco Polo, but by sea. Map makers at the time know nothing about the Americas. To them, this double continent doesn't exist. They believe there's a vast, uncrossable ocean between Europe and Asia. Columbus thinks they're wrong, that the world is smaller than they realize. And it's quite easy to sail from Europe to China.
When Columbus said, let's sail west, they had a picture of the Earth in their mind. They said, are you crazy? No.
For almost a decade, Columbus tries to finance his crazy scheme. He's turned down by the rulers of Portugal, Venice, and Genoa.
At a Hanukkah celebration in 2018, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the popular Puerto Rican congresswoman from New York, surprised a small crowd by announcing that she has Jewish ancestry.
My family consisted of Sephardic Jews.
Later that same week, a groundbreaking study came out of Latin America. After testing DNA samples from 6,000 randomly selected people across the region, researchers found that 23% of them had at least 5% of their DNA from Spanish Jewish heritage. Back in 2015, the Spanish government announced that they'd grant citizenship to any non-Spaniards who could prove that they are descendants of Jews who were expelled from the country in the 15th century. By late 2019, Spain revealed that they had received 127,000 applications. The most popular countries? Mexico, Venezuela, and Colombia. All this points to one big question. Why do so many Latin Americans have Jewish heritage?
But Columbus is on a search for treasure.
I kept my eyes open and tried to find if there was any gold.
Columbus returns to Spain a hero. His journeys open the floodgates. Tenochtitlan, Mexico, heart of the Aztec Empire. 28 years after Columbus, the lust for gold is about to change the destiny of the New World. Through the ambitions of one man, Hernán Cortés. Devious, charming, and ruthless, leading a band of just 500 European adventurers.
Cortés was quite a manipulator and quite savvy. He knows how to motivate people, and the objective is gold, and that's what, of course, was the prime motivation.
Aztec Emperor Montezuma, the richest, most powerful man in the Americas, ruler of 25 million people. He's welcomed Cortés and his men into his palace, a mistake that will change the fate of a continent.
Their numbers were small. How could they constitute a threat when you have an army that's 1,000 times, 10,000 times larger than the few hundred souls that they brought, right?
Cortez's plan? Kidnap the emperor. Fighting for their lives, Cortés and his men barely escape, with a fortune in Aztec gold and silver. And leave behind a lethal time bomb.
The conquistadors are going to war with the Aztecs. But their biggest weapons aren't the ones they're carrying in their hands. It's the virus in their bodies. Smallpox. Unbeknownst to them, they bring it to battle.
6 months later, half the city is dead from smallpox. "11 months after his escape, Cortés returns. His victory complete. He's hijacked the mighty Aztec Empire. An empire of 25 million, brought down by just 500 men.
The Afro-Argentines are black immigrants from Africa who were enslaved in Argentina in the 18th century. Their large numbers formed a significant part of the Argentina population, but after a few years, their numbers decreased. In 1778, according to a census carried out by the Spanish Council, it was discovered that the Afro-Argentines were about 37% of Argentina's population. Many years later, they dropped to about 15% of the total population, and now Argentina is currently the whitest country in South America. Due to the limited population of the Afros, it's almost impossible to find them in notable careers such as sports, journalism, politics, and many more. Some were from Cape Verde Islands, while the majority were from ethnic groups speaking Bantu languages, from territories, which comprise Angola, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the Republic of Congo. There were a few Yoruba and Iwe. In the 1600s, according to an estimate, 12 million African slaves got to Latin America through slave ships. But while passing through the Atlantic, about 10 to 15% of the captured slaves died, and many more died during the process of enslavement while traveling through the interior part of Africa. There's a record of about 40 deaths for every 100 slaves who successfully reached the New World. Some of these black men were captured and taken to Buenos Aires, which is the capital of Argentina. Their main commercial activity at the time was trading slaves for money. The slaves were forced to work in agriculture, livestock, domestic activities, and crafts. A memorable feat was achieved when November 8 was assigned by the Argentine legislation to celebrate Maria Remedios del Val, the female Afro-Argentine soldier who fought for Argentina during the Argentine War of Independence in the 1800th century. But one thing is certain. White Argentina found it quite difficult to completely eradicate the black Argentines in its libraries, which is a good thing, most especially for the Afro-Argentines who had bravely fought for the country's freedom.
We've got to go back to the year 1492. Two huge historical events took place that year, and both had serious lasting consequences. First, Spain started to colonize the Americas. And second, back on their side of the Atlantic, the Spanish government enacted the Alhambra Decree, which forced Jews to either convert to Catholicism or leave the country for good. Spain had already been murdering or forcibly converting Jews for over a century. That was part of the Spanish Inquisition. But this was the final nail in the coffin. Now, Jews had only two options: get baptized or get out. Nobody knows exactly how many Jews chose the second option and fled. Keeping a census of Jewish citizens wasn't exactly a priority for medieval Spain. On the low end, some historians think it was tens of thousands, though others think it could have been as many as 1 million. Regardless, it seems that most of Spain's Jews decided to stick around and agreed to become Catholics. But not all Jews handled the transition the same way. Some weren't very religious to start with, so changing creeds wasn't such a hard choice given the alternative. These types of converts became known as New Catholics. Others were determined to practice their Judaism in secret. They were called Marranos, but today that's generally considered a derogatory term, and the phrase crypto-Jews has become more popular. In Hebrew, both groups are called Anusim, which means people who are forced to abandon their Judaism, and in English they are known as conversos, literally people who converted. Regardless of the name, back in the 1400s, the Spanish Inquisition and later Spanish policies had one goal when it came to Judaism: eliminate it. At the same time, Spain ramped up its colonization of the Americas. Over the next 4 centuries, millions of Spaniards arrived on the shores of the New World. Even though the government tried to restrict the movement of conversos, it was really difficult to keep track of them, since they were, after all, Catholics now.
1579. The Pacific Ocean, off the coast of South America. A ship on a mission that launches a new age of piracy. Small, fast, armed with 18 cannons. At the helm, an Englishman, Francis Drake. Farmer's son, fearless navigator, and the most successful pirate in history. In his sights, a Spanish galleon, loaded with a metal so valuable, it will change the world. Drake's secret partner in crime is the English Queen, Elizabeth I.
Drake was given letters of reprisal, signed by the British Crown, which meant that he could go and raid Spanish shipping. What he did was piracy.
He's already plundered over 70 Spanish ships. The King of Spain has put a price on his head. $10 million today. Dead or alive. The Spanish ship, the Cacafuego, heads for the coast of Panama with the most valuable cargo ever seen at sea. In its hold, 26 tons of silver from the Americas, worth $30 million today. Barrels thrown off the stern slow Drake's ship down. 220 tons of silver mined each year. Potosi becomes the busiest industrial complex in the world. In each year, in 3 giant furnaces, the Spanish mint 2.5 million silver coins. Pesos de ocho, pieces of 8, the world's first universal currency. Silver becomes the key to mankind's prosperity.
These Spanish coins are seen everywhere in the world. They unite the world in a web of commerce.
A single coin worth the equivalent of $80 today. Legal tender in the USA until 1857. The scroll and pillars of the Spanish royal crest inspires one of the world's most potent symbols, the dollar sign.
The result is extraordinary. The entire world's economy is affected as this silver just explodes out of the Americas, crosses the Pacific, crosses into Europe, and there's an enormous burst of prosperity. This is the true beginning of globalization.
Spanish fleets ship 50,000 tons of silver out of the Americas, creating a new Atlantic trade.
Suddenly we have mass quantities coming onto the market, which is going to really transform all of European trade. And what we see is a whole new booming economy in Europe.
New trading centers rise. Seville, Lisbon, London. And on the coast of a small new country, the Netherlands, the world's richest and busiest trading city. Amsterdam, 1639. A city flush with new money. A century after the Spanish conquest of the New World, the riches of the Americas and an explosion of global trade have turned the Netherlands into the richest nation on the planet. The Dutch control over half the world's shipping. More new millionaires than anywhere else on Earth. The highest income per head in Europe. A city in love with gambling. Caught up in the excitement, Jan van Hoyen. Struggling artist, looking for a new way to make his fortune.
In a wealthy city, a city of great merchants and great enterprises, he's a guy on the move. And he wants to get in on this action.
New wealth drives the demand for new luxuries. And one exotic import has captured the public's imagination: the tulip. Imported from Turkey, The patterns of the most exotic tulips are created by a virus that attacks only some bulbs, making them rare and hard to cultivate. Today, a tulip bulb sells for about 50 cents. But in Holland in 1636, the rarest bulbs are selling for 100 times their weight in gold. Amsterdam's merchants are inventing new ways of making money. The birth of speculation. In the back rooms of taverns, tulip merchants sell not flowers or bulbs, but the rights to next year's harvest. The world's first futures market.
Today, all agricultural products are sold at futures markets. You can buy crops that have not been harvested yet. Similarly, tulips were bought in advance of their delivery date.
In 1 month in November 1636, the price of tulip shares has quadrupled. Van Hoyen sees an opportunity.
Until now, if you weren't nobility or you weren't a great merchant, you weren't wealthy. But here's a chance for the common people to become wealthy.
Confident of a quick return, Van Hoyen invests all his savings in tulip shares. By the beginning of December, the price of tulip bulbs reaches 10 times their price a month before. A bubble has started to inflate. By December 12th, the price doubles again. At an auction in nearby Leiden, the 7 penniless orphans of an innkeeper pin their hopes for the future on their dead father's small collection of tulip bulbs. In less than an hour, each child earns 40 times the annual income of an average craftsman. "10% of all Americans today are descended from these first 50 pioneers. Within 100 years, they found great trading cities that rival those of Europe. Charleston, Philadelphia, New York, Boston. 50 pioneers who turned their back on a world devoted to making money, lay the foundations of the United States, the greatest trading nation of the future.
Jews came to the United States before its states even united. When Portugal drove out the Dutch from Brazil in 1654, a group of 23 Jews fled to New Amsterdam. Peter Stuyvesant, Director General of the colony, tried to push them out. But after 3 years of legal wrangling, they were allowed to settle in Manhattan as long as they did not build a synagogue or run for public office.
And so the pinnacle of Muslim success was to take over Granada in Spain, which they were eventually outed from, but this area that's known as Spain and Portugal today was once known as the Iberian Peninsula, and the word Iberian comes from the word Ibri in the Hebrew language, which is Hebrew in Hebrew. And so we know that the Hebrews were there, not only that, the Muslims, and also the Sephardic Jews. And these three people groups all came from the southern part of ancient Israel. They were the people that were in Judea, who were the genuine Hebrews, and also to the south were the Edomites, who became known as the Udameans when they moved into Judea, and also the Ishmaelites, who became the Arabs. And Saudi Arabia today is really Esau Arabia, or Esau Arabia, named after the Ishmaelites, who are the Arabs, and the Edomites, who are the Jews. And so let's have a look now at Spain and the Sephardic Jews.
How many people really realize what happened within the Jewish community in Spain in 1492?
Well, this is a mystery that God has kept for a long time. Because we've said that Christopher Columbus is from Italy. No, he's from Portugal. No, he's from Spain. Well, where is he really from? Well, they say that he was from Genoa, Italy, but his Italian writing is horrible. But his Castilian is perfect, So, so be it as it may, recently there is a growth, an exponential growth of discoveries that point to the fact that Christopher Columbus, first of all, his name is not Columbus. His name, and not because I'm Hispanic with Sanchez surname and Martinez and so forth, but his name is Colón. And so in Spanish we have it right, Cristóbal Colón. So his real name is Salvador Zarco. All right, but now recently we've discovered that Christopher Columbus, Cristóbal Colón, was known as a quote-unquote marrano. Marrano? The marranos are those that were forced to convert to Roman Catholicism, that were Sephardim, and then they were forced to eat pork, which is very unkosher, and then they were called marrano, pigs, swine. Because you see, the facade of the Spanish Inquisition, what is Inquisition? It comes from the root word to inquire. But this was more than inquiring. This was spying and forcing Jews to convert to Roman Catholicism. So what's happening during this time is that it's not so much the facade of religion to force people to convert, it was greed. It's because the crown, the King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella are going broke. They're exploring all over the place, wars all over the place. They need money, all right? So who's got the money? Who are the financiers? Who are the ones that are so wealthy in Spain and later Portugal? Well, the Sephardim, the Jews, okay. So as early as 1391, there was a major diaspora, meaning scattering, because of the oppression, tortures, burnings at the stake of the Jews before and after conversion.
Please excuse any mispronunciation of names given herein. The story of the slaves in America begins with Christopher Columbus. His voyage to America was not financed by Queen Isabella, but by Louis de Santiago, who advanced the sum of 17,000 ducats, about 5,000 pounds today, equal to 50,000 pounds, to finance the voyage, which began on August 3rd, 1492. Columbus was accompanied by 5 Marranos, Jews who had forsworn their religion and supposedly became Catholics. Louis de Torre, interpreter, Marco, the surgeon, Bamal, the physician, Alonso de la Calle, and Gabriel Sanchez. The reference is The International Jew by Henry Ford. Gabriel Sanchez, abetted by the other 4 Jews, sold Columbus on the idea of capturing 500 Indians and selling them as slaves in Seville, Spain, which was done. Columbus did not receive any of the money from the sale of the slaves, but he became the victim of a conspiracy fostered by Bamal, the ship's doctor. He, Columbus, suffered injustice and imprisonment as his reward, betrayed by the 5 Marranos, or Jews, whom he had trusted and helped. This, ironically, was the beginning of slavery in the Americas. The source is Adventures of an African Slaver, published in 1928, page 11. The Jews were expelled from Spain on August 2nd, 1492, and from Portugal in 1497. Many of these Jews immigrated to Holland, where they set up the Dutch West Indies Company to exploit the New World. In 1654, the first Jew, Jacob Bar Simpson, immigrated from Holland to New Amsterdam, or New York. And in the next decade, many more followed him, settling along the East Coast, principally in New Amsterdam and Newport, Rhode Island. They were prevented by ordinances issued by Governor Peter Stuyvesant from engaging in the domestic economy, so they quickly discovered that the territory inhabited by the Indians would be a fertile field. There were no laws preventing the Jews from trading with the Indians. The first Jew to begin trading with the Indians was Hyman Levy, who imported cheap glass beads, textiles, earrings, armbands, and other cheap adornments from Holland, which were traded for valuable fur pelts. Hyman Levy was soon joined by Jews Nicholas Lowe and Joseph Simon. Lowe conceived the idea of trading rum and whiskey to the Indians and set up a distillery in Newport, where these two liquors were produced. Within a short time, there were 22 distilleries in Newport, all of them owned by Jews, manufacturing and distributing firewater. The story of the debauching of the Indians with its resultant massacres of the early settlers is a dramatic story in itself. It is essential to comprehend the seaport of Newport. It is important in order to recognize the Jewish share in the slave commerce. There was a period when it was commonly referred to as, quote, the Jewish Newport World Center of Slave Commerce, unquote. Altogether at this time, there were, in North America, 6 Jewish communities: Newport, Charleston, New York, Philadelphia, Richmond, and Savannah. There were also many other Jews, scattered over the entire East Coast. Although New York held first place in the settlers of Jews in North America, Newport held second place. New York was also the main source of kosher meat, supplying the North American settlements, then the West Indies, and also South America. Now Newport took over. Newport also became the great trade harbor of the East Coast of North America. There, vessels from other ports met to exchange commodities. Newport, as previously mentioned, represented the foremost place in the commerce of rum, whiskey, and liquor dealings. And to include, it finally became the main center of slave dealings. It was from this port that the ships left on their way across the ocean to gather their black human cargo and then derive great sums of money in exchange for them. An authentic contemporary report based on authority indicates that of 128 slave ships, for instance, unloaded in Charleston within 1 year, their cargo, 120 of these were undersigned by Jews from Newport and Charleston by their own name. About the rest of them, one can surmise, although they were entered as Boston, Norfolk, and Baltimore. Their real owners were similarly the Jewish slave dealers from Newport and Charleston. One is able to assess the Jewish share in the entire dealings of Newport if one considers the undertaking of a lone Jew, Portuguese Aaron Lopez, who plays an important part in the overall story of the Jews and slavery. Concerning the entire commerce of the colonies and the later state of Rhode Island, which included Newport, bills of lading, concessions, receipts, and port clearances carried the signature name of Jew Aaron Lopez. This also took place during the years 1726 to 1774. He had, therefore, more than 50% of all dealings under his personal control for almost 50 years. Aside from that, there were other ships which he owned, but sailed under other names. In the year 1749, the first Masonic Lodge was established. 90% of the members of this first lodge, 14 all told, were Jews, and one knows that only so-called prominent individuals were accepted. 20 years later, the second Masonic Lodge, or King David, was established. It is a fact that all of these members were Jews. In the meantime, the Jewish influence in Newport had reached such proportions that President George Washington decided to pay them a visit. Upon his appearance, both of the Masonic lodges sent an emissary, a Jew named Moses Sysex, to approach the president with a petition in which the Jews of Newport stated, quote, "If you will permit the children of Abraham to approach you with a request, to tell you that we honor you and feel an alliance," and then, quote, "Until the present time, the valuable rights of a free citizen have been withheld. However, now we see a new government coming into being, based on the majesty of the people. A government not sanctioning any bigotry nor persecution of the Jew, rather to concede the freedom of thought, which each shares, whatever nation or language, as a part of the great government machine," unquote. It is necessary at this point to consider the disclosures as to who, in reality, obtained this legendary freedom in America at the founding of the Union. To be sure, the province became independent and severed from the English jurisdiction. However, we can see from the petition which Moses Sissex offered President Washington in the name of the Jews of Newport, that it was not in reality this type of freedom which they had in mind. They were merely concerned about themselves and their, quote, own civil rights, unquote, which had been withheld. Therefore, following the Revolutionary War, the Jews were accorded equal rights and freed of all restrictions. And the Negroes? Well, the Revolutionary War notwithstanding, they remained slaves. In the year 1750, 1/6 of the population in New York was Negroid, and proportionately in the southern parts of the country, they outnumbered the others. But the proclamation of freedom did not touch them. More of this later. Let us scrutinize at close range this dismal handiwork of the Jews, which gave them influence and power, so we may comprehend the slave trade. For there has been so much written since that time by the zealous Jewish writers, that at the present, long since removed, it might appear natural, for the time element has a tendency to make things nebulous. Let us follow the journey of one ship owned by a slave dealer, Aaron Lopez, which had made many trips to the African coast. For instance, in the month of May 1752, the ship Abigail was equipped with about 9,000 gallons of rum, a great supply of iron foot and hand restraints, pistols, powder, sabers, and a lot of worthless tin ornaments, and under the command of the Jewish Captain Friedman, sailed off for Africa. There were but 2 mates and 6 sailors comprising the crew. 3½ months later, they landed on the African coast. Meantime, there had been constructed an African agency by the Jewish slave dealers, who had corralled them and prepared them for sale. This organization, reaching deep into Africa, had many ramifications, including the heads of groups, villages, etc. This method to win over these leaders for the Jewish slave trade was similar to that which the Jews had employed with the Indians. At first, they presented them with rum, and soon found themselves in an alcoholic delirium. When the gold dust and ivory supply was exhausted, they were induced to sell their descendants. At first their wives, and then their youths. Then they began warfare among each other, plotted and developed mostly by the Jews. And if they captured prisoners, these too were exchanged for rum, ammunitions, and weapons to the Jews, using them for further campaigns to capture more Negroes. The captured blacks were linked 2 by 2 and driven through the medieval forests to the coast. These painful treks required weeks, and some of them frequently became ill and felled by exhaustion, and many unable to rise, even though the bullwhip was applied as an encourager. They were left to die and were devoured by wild beasts. It was not unusual to see the bones of the dead laying in the tropical sun, a sad and gruesome reminder of those who would later on tread this path. It has been calculated that for each Negro who withstood the rigors of this wandering, there still had to be the long voyage across the ocean before they reached American soil. 9 out of 10 died. And when one considers that there was a yearly exodus of 1 million black slaves, then, and only then, can one assess the tremendous and extensive exodus of the African people. At present, Africa is thinly populated, not alone due to the 1 million literally dragged out of huts, but due to the 5 to 9 million who never reached their destination. Once they reached the coast, the black slaves were driven together, and restraints were applied to hold them until the next transport ship docked. The agents, many of them Jews, who represented the chief, then began the deal with the captain. Each Negro was personally presented to him, but the captains had learned to become suspicious. The black one must move his fingers, arms, legs, and the entire body to ensure that there were not any fractures. Even the teeth were examined. If a tooth was lacking, it lowered the price. Most of the Jew agents knew how to treat sick Negroes with chemicals in order to sell them as sound. Each Negro was valued at about 100 gallons of rum, 100 pounds of gunpowder, or in cash between $18 to $20. The notations of a captain inform us that on September 5th, 1763, one Negro brought as much as 200 gallons of rum, due to the bidding amongst the agents, raising the price. Women under 25 years, pregnant or not, resulted in the same measure if they were well and comely. Any over 25 years lost 25%. And here it should be stated that those Negroes purchased free at the African coast for $20 to $40 were then resold by the same slave dealers in America for $2,000. This gives one an idea how the Jews managed to acquire tremendous fortunes. Following the bargaining, Captain Friedman paid the bill, either in merchandise or cash. He also recalled some advice which his Jewish employers gave him as he left Newport for Africa. Quote, "Pour as much water into the rum as you possibly can," unquote. In this manner, the Negro chiefs were cheated 2 times by the Newport Jews. The next step was to shave the hair from the head of the acquired slaves. Then they were bound and branded with a hot iron, either on the back or the hip, identifying them with their owners. Now the Negro slave was indeed the property of the Jewish purchaser. If he fled, he could be identified. Following this procedure, there was a farewell celebration. There were instances when entire families were brought out of the interior to the coast, and then separated through the buyer, the father going with one ship, the sons and daughters into another. These farewell celebrations were usually packed with emotion, tears, drama, and sadness. There was little joy, if ever. The following day, the transport began from land to ship. It was managed by taking 4 to 6 Negroes at one time in rowboats to the ship. Of course, the slave dealers were aware of how the Negro loved his homeland above all else, and could only be induced by great force to leave it. So, some of the Negroes would leap into the water, but here the overseers were prepared with sharp dogs and retrieved the fleeing men. Other Negroes preferred drowning. What came aboard alive was immediately undressed. Here was another opportunity to jump overboard and reach land and freedom. But the slave dealers were pitiless and ruthless. They were merely concerned to get their black cargo to America with the least loss. Therefore, an escapee, recaptured, had both of his legs cut off before the eyes of the remaining Negroes in order to restore order. On board the ship, the Negroes were separated into 3 groups. The men were placed in one part of the ship, the women into another, whereby the lusty captain arranged it so that the youngest, mostly comely Negro women were accessible to him. The children remained on deck, covered with a cloth in bad weather. In this fashion, the slave ship proceeded on its journey to America. In the main, the ships were too small and not at all suitable to transport people. They were barely equipped to transport animals, which the Negroes were likened to. In one space, 1 meter high, 39 inches, these unfortunate creatures were placed into a horizontal position, pressed close together. Mostly, they were chained together. In this position, they had to remain for 3 months until the end of the voyage. Rarely was there a captain who sympathized with them or evidenced any feelings whatever for these pitiable creatures. Occasionally, they would be taken in groups to the deck for fresh air, shackled in irons. Somehow these Negroes were expendable and endured much. On occasion, one of them became insane, killing the other one pressed closely to him. They also had their fingernails closely cut so they could not tear at each other's flesh. The most horrible battles came about among the men, to acquire a centimeter or 2 for a comfortable position. It was then that the slave overseer stepped in with his bullwhip. The unimaginable, horrible human excrement in which these slaves had to endure these trips is impossible to describe. In the women's quarters, the same conditions prevailed. Women gave birth to children, lying pressed closely together. The younger Negro women were constantly raped by the captain and the crew, resulting thereby in a new type of mulatto as they came to America. In Virginia, or in any other southern port cities, the slaves were transferred to the land and immediately sold. The regular auction would take place, following the method of purchase in Africa. The highest bidder obtained the ware. In many cases, due to the indescribable filth, some of the blacks became ill during the sea voyage from Africa to America. They became unemployable. In such cases, the captain accepted any price. It was rare to dispose of them, for no one wanted to purchase a sick Negro. Therefore, it is not surprising that the Jewish, unethical doctor senses a new form of revenue. They purchased the sick Negro for a small sum, then treated him and sold him for a large sum. On occasion, the captain would be left with a few Negroes for whom he did not find a buyer. In that case, he returned to Newport and sold them to the Jews for cheap domestic help. In other cases, the Jew owner of the ships took them over. This is why the city of Newport and its surroundings had 4,697 black slaves in the year 1756. Slavery did not extend to the north. Moreover, in many of the North American colonies, slavery was strictly forbidden. Georgia came under discussion, likewise also Philadelphia, and again it was the Jews who managed a loophole, which had given them freedom following the Revolutionary War. So they schemed to make slave trading legal. One had but to read the names of those persons living in Philadelphia who were requesting the elimination of existing laws regarding the slavery dealing. They were the Jews Seneford, Lay, Woolman, Solomon, and Benezet. That explained it all. But let us turn back to the slave ship Abigail. Its captain, and we are reading from his ship's books, did a profitable business. He sold all of his Negroes in Virginia, invested some of the money in tobacco, rice, sugar, and cotton, and went on to Newport, where he deposited his wares. We learned from Captain Freedman's books that the Abigail was a small ship and could only accommodate 56 people. He managed, however, to clear from one trip $6,621, which he in turn delivered to the owner of the ship, one Aaron Lopez, the Jew. The staggering amounts of money acquired by the Jew ship owners and slavery dealers is better illustrated when we emphasize the many years in which this sale and purchase of human flesh was practiced. Prior to 1661, all the colonies had laws prohibiting slavery. It was in that year that the Jews had become powerful enough to bring about the repeal of these laws, and slavery began in earnest. The Jews had discovered that the colonists needed additional manpower to help them clear their fields for planting, helping in the construction of dwellings, and in general to help with harvesting their crops. This was particularly true of the southern states, which we have referred to earlier. The Southerners had vast tracts of rich soil suitable for rice, cotton, tobacco, and cane sugar. At first, impoverished Europeans were recruited. English prison doors were opened, and finally prisoners of war from England and Holland were brought to the colonies, made to work until they had paid the cost of transporting them by ship and then set free. It doesn't take a Jew long to discover what his brothers are doing. So a group of Jews settled in Charleston, South Carolina, where they set up distilleries for making rum and whiskey. They too learned that they could trade with the natives on the west coast of Africa for ivory, and several ships were purchased and sent to Africa, trading the usual glass beads and other cheap ornaments for ivory, which, however, took up but little space on board the ship. It occurred to these Jew traders that they could supply the plantations in the south with black ivory, needed under swampy and malarial conditions which European labor could not tolerate without sickness, and which would not only fill the holds of their ships, but bring enormous profits. This same group had earlier tried selling Indians as slaves, but they found them completely unsatisfactory, as the Indians would not tolerate this type of work. Thus another segment of the slave trading had become active and profitable outside of Charleston, South Carolina. Several shipholds of black slaves were sent by the Dutch West Indies Company to Manhattan. During this time, there were a number of plantation owners established in the West Indies, and two Jews, Urjair and Sayir, with strong Rothschild connections in Spain, formed an agency called Asiento, which later operated in Holland and England. It was through these connections that Jews in Holland and England exerted influence, and both of these connections cooperated in helping the Jews provide black slaves for the colonists. With the yearly capture and transport of 1 million black slaves, it is not difficult to figure that from 1661 to 1774, 113 years, approximately 110 million slaves had been removed from their native land. About 10%, or 11 million, black slaves reached the colonies alive. We have talked about the small ship Abigail, which could accommodate only 56 people, and yet the profits per trip were enormous, with little or no investment. There were many other ships, but we will concentrate here on only a few, such as the La Fortuna, Hannah, Sally, or the Venue, which made very great profits. The La Fortuna, by the way, transported approximately 217 slaves on each trip. The owner cleared not less than $41,438 from such a trip. These were dollars which the slave dealers could keep, and these were dollars of value which would buy a great deal in return. When one considers that the Jews of Newport owned about 300 slave-transporting ships, active without interruption, docking at Newport, Africa, Charleston, or Virginia, one can approximate the tremendous earnings which made their way to Jewish ship owners. Indeed, the Jews admit that of the 600 ships leaving Newport Harbor into all the world, at least half of them went their way to Africa, and we know what these ships going to Africa were seeking. The fact that Aaron Lopez had control of over more than half of the combined deals of the colonies of Rhode Island with Newport is well known. The well-known Rabbi Morris A. Gutstein, in his book, The Story of the Jews in Newport, attempts to remove these facts, maintaining that there is not any evidence that the Jews were connected with the slave trade. It is therefore imperative to prove that the Jew was indeed connected with the slave trading, especially so since this rabbi insists they had made great contributions and how very blessed their residence became for the city of Newport. Surely Morris A. Gutstein will grant us permission to present the facts which he was unable to find. Turning to one report of the Chamber of Commerce of the Rhode Island colony in the year 1764, we find, for instance, that in the year 1723, quote, a few merchants in Newport, unquote, devised the idea to send their Newport rum to the coast of Africa. It developed into such a great export that in the matter of a few years, quote, several thousand hogsheads, unquote, of rum went that way. To which purpose did this rum serve? The Carnegie Institute in Washington, D.C. presents and makes public authentic documents entitled, quote, Documents Illustrative of the History of the Slave Trade in America, unquote. We wish to present a few facts from this particular collection of original documents and scrutinize them at closer range, and not at all to prove the heretofore Rabbi Morris A. Gutstein in error. In this collection of the First American Institute of Learning, we evaluate the capital, Rhode Island, which contributed the main share of the public documentation regarding the slave trading. Here we find documented the recipients of the numerous shipping letters, also letters to the slave dealers, and correspondence to the ship's captains, who were about 15% Jews, living in Newport. Among these we find, for instance, the Jew Isaac Elazar. He wrote a letter to Captain Christopher Champlin on February 6, 1763, saying he would like to be an agent for a load of slaves. Then follows the Jew Abraham Pereira Mendez and one of the main slave dealers, Jacob Rod Rivera, the father-in-law of Aaron Lopez. And then there is Aaron Lopez himself and many, many other Jews. Although we have considered Aaron Lopez several times, the size of this documented treatise limits us, and we cannot describe all of the writers concerned in the slavery-dealing correspondence, their names and special dates. Rather, we wish to study the documentation of the Carnegie Institute itself, keeping Aaron Lopez in mind. We wish to see what in the main this Jew was pursuing and what his business was. This is due to the fact that Rabbi Morris A. Gutstein presents him as a, quote, lofty and fine civilian of Newport, who was so generous and even, quote, made contributions to the welfare, unquote. In a great number of published, original, unprejudiced writings in the Carnegie Institute, we find that Aaron Lopez pursued a tremendous commerce in rum with the African coast in exchange for slaves. These irrefutable facts are as follows. June 22nd, 1764, a letter by Captain William Steed to Aaron Lopez. July 22nd, 1765, a letter by Aaron Lopez to Captain Nathaniel Briggs. July 22nd, 1765, a letter to Captain Abraham All. February 4th, 1766, a letter to Captain William Steed by Aaron Lopez. March 7th, 1766, a letter by Captain William Steed to Aaron Lopez, and so on and so forth. Aside from that, there are similar statements out of letters by Aaron Lopez in the original, which he directed to Captains Henry Kruger, David Mill, Henry White, Thomas Dolbear, and William Moore. Indeed, one letter by Captain William Moore to Aaron Lopez and Company is particularly revealing, and of special mention at this point. We wish to remark on the main contents of this letter, in which Captain Moore writes, quote, I wish to advise you that your ship Anne, docked here night before last, with 112 slaves, consisting of 35 men, 16 large youths, 21 small boys, 29 women, 2 grown girls, 9 small girls, and I assure you this is such a one-rum cargo, or rum in exchange for slaves, which I have not yet encountered. Among the entire group, there may be 5 to which one could take exception." Unquote. The date of the above letter was November 27th, 1773. We have not yet concluded, because of lack of space, the excerpts and grateful compilations made available by the Carnegie Institute. On November 29th, 1767, the Jew Abraham Pereira Mendez, who had been cheated by one of his own kind, from Charleston, where he had journeyed to better control his black cargo, wrote Aaron Lopez at Newport, quote, "These Negroes, which Captain Abraham all delivered to me, were in such poor condition, due to the poor transportation, that I was forced to sell 8 boys and girls for a mere 27 pounds, 2 other for 45 pounds, and 2 women each for 35 pounds. No doubt English money. Abraham Pereira Mendez was very angry and accused Aaron Lopez of cheating him. This letter delineates to us that this generous and fine citizen of New York was insatiable in his greed for money. This is what caused the Rabbi Morris A. Gutstein to present this nobleman, Aaron Lopez, to pursue his objectionable methods. Negroes presented to him but a commodity. In all the letters which the Carnegie Institute published, it stresses the lack of human sympathy for the poor Negro slaves. This lack of feeling and compassion for the abused and pitiful blacks at the hands of their Jewish dealers can be read out of the diary of a captain who manned a ship owned by Aaron Lopez. The entries concern a trip from the African coast to Charleston. Moreover, they are authentic documents published by the Carnegie Institute in Washington, D.C., calling attention to an organization which had heretofore known little or nothing about. Neither had they encountered further publicity in books or newspapers. Therefore, it is not to be wondered at that the facts of the leading share of American Jews in the slave trade could be pointed out as a monopoly and unknown to the non-Jewish Americans, including the great masses of people all over the world. Others, however, acquainted with the facts, had good reason to remain painfully quiet. The captain of another ship, the Othello, among other things, makes the following entries in his diary. February 6th, 1 man drowned in the process of loading. March 18th, 2 women went overboard because they had not been locked up. April 6th, 1 man dead with flux. April 13th, 1 woman dead with flux. May 7th, 1 man dead with flux. June 16th, 1 man dead by Cap Henry. June 21st, 1 man dead by James Fluce. July 5th, 1 woman dead with fever. July 6th, 1 girl, sick for 2 months, died. This vessel was on its way for 5 months. What terrible and unspeakable suffering was the lot of these millions of blacks, who were torn with brutal force from their friendly African huts, jammed together like animals below deck, and then sold with less concern than selling a head of cattle. Small wonder that 10 of them died, being purchased for just a few dollars and then sold for the sum of $2,000. Some Negroes managed through insurrection to gain control of one or another ship and turned it around, with full sails toward their African home. The crew of one slave ship, called 3 Friends, for instance, tortured their black cargo in such manner that the Negroes reciprocated in a bloody rebellion. They killed the captain and the entire crew and threw the dead overboard. They then sailed back to Africa, where they had barely escaped their hard-won freedom. A similar fate struck the slave ship Amistad. Among the slaves was the son of an enemy tribal chief. Once the ship was underway, he schemed with his compatriots to attack the ship's crew. Following a bloody battle, they managed to capture the captain. The Negro prince forced him to turn back to Africa. Then, in the evening, under cover of darkness, he changed his course, zigzagged for months until he came close to the American coast, and encountered a government ship. This took place in the year 1839, when slave trading was already forbidden and illegal. What the movie Amistad will not tell you is the Jewish involvement in the slave trade. The Negro slaves were freed and the captain punished. These sea voyages were not without danger when they had black cargo, which accounts for the fact that the Jews most always engaged non-Jewish captains. The slave dealers preferred to remain in their offices and counted the fat winnings following each journey, such as Aaron Lopez, who left his heirs one of the largest fortunes in the New England era. When reviewing the documented facts contained herein, it is important that one always remembers that it was a lucky captain who did not lose more than 9 out of 19 slaves on the return trip. It is equally important to remember that these poor black creatures had to lie in human excrement for the entire trip. Think about it. No wonder sickness and disease took such a high toll. Remember the figures. Approximately 110 million black people were captured and removed from their homeland in Africa. Only 11 million of these black slaves reached the colonies alive. And the Jews still talk about the Germans and Hitler and how supposedly 6 million Jews were exterminated during World War II, whereas the story of the poor black slaves is documented with truth. The evidence is still available for the people of the world to see. The Carnegie Institute of Technology is located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. As this movie and the document which I am narrating from is distributed, eventually reaching the hands of the Jews, the evidence will probably be removed and destroyed until finally all documentation is removed which is damaging to the Jew. The published documentation contained herein was obtained from the Carnegie Institute of Learning, presently known as the Carnegie Institute of Technology. The following is a partial list of the slave ships owned by the Jews. The Abigail by Aaron Lopez, Moses Levy, and Jacob Franks. The Crown by Isaac Levy and Nathan Simpson. The Nassau by Moses Levy, Four Sisters by Moses Levy. The Anne and Eliza by Justice Bosch and John Abrams. The Prudent Betty by Henry Kruger and Jacob Phoenix. The Hester by Mordecai and David Gomez. The Elizabeth by David and Mordecai Gomez. The Antique by Nathan Marston and Abram Lale. The Betsy by De Wolf. The Poi by James De Wolf. The White Horse by Jan de Sviets. The Expedition by John and Jacob Roosevelt. The Charlotte by Moses and Sam Levy and Jacob Franks. The Carcoa by Moses and Sam Levy. Slave runners, also owned by Jews, were the La Fortuna, the Hannah, the Sally, and the Venue. Some of the Jews of Newport and Charleston who were engaged in the distillery or slavery trade, or both, were Isaac Gomez, Hyman Levy, Jacob Malhado, Naphtali Myers, David Hart, Joseph Jacobs, Moses Ben Franks, Moses Gomez, Isaac Dias, Benjamin Levy, David Yeshivim, Jacob Pinto, Jacob Turk, Daniel Gomez, James Lacana, Jan de Sviets, Isaac Elizer, Jacob Rod, and many others. Of some 600 ships leaving the port of Newport, more than 300 were engaged in the slave trade. A typical cargo of one ship, La Fortuna, was 217 slaves, which cost about $4,300 and sold for $41,438. Only about 10% of the slave ship captains were Jews, not wanting to subject themselves to the rigors of the 6-month journey. They preferred to stay at home and continue their distillery operations, which continued to supply rum and whiskey to the Indians for many years at a very great profit. You can continue your own research through the following references and documentation. Finally, we cannot undertake even this brief history of the modern Jew without taking note of a phenomenon which has confounded Gentile societies for 20 centuries. This is the ability of the Jewish people to collectively retain their identity despite centuries of exposure to Christian civilization. To any student of Judaism, or to the Jews themselves, this phenomena is partly explained by the fact that Judaism is neither mainly a religion, nor mainly a racial matter, nor yet is it simply a matter of nationality. Rather, it is all three. It is a kind of trinity. Judaism is best described as a nationality built on the twin pillars of race and religion. All this is closely related to another aspect of Judaism, namely the persecution myth. Since first appearing in history, we find the Jews propagating the idea that they are an abused and persecuted people. And this idea is, and has always been, central in Jewish thinking. The myth of persecution is the adhesive and cement of Judaism. Without it, Jews would have long since ceased to exist, their racial, religious nationality notwithstanding. It is a fact that the Jewish people have suffered numerous hardships in the course of their history, but this is true of other peoples too. The chief difference is that the Jews have kept score. We must repeat, they have kept score. They have made a tradition of persecution. A casual slaughter of thousands of Christians is remembered by no one in 50 years, but a disability visited upon a few Jews is preserved forever in Jewish histories, and they tell their woes not only to themselves, but to a sympathetic world as well.
Hey guys, hope you enjoyed that episode. Stay tuned for the next part. Much love. Peace.
They not like us. 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 You think the Bay gon' let you disrespect Pop, nigga? I think that Oakland show gon' be on that stop, nigga. They cold foul, I don't know why you still pretending. What is the owl? Bird niggas and bird bitches, go. The audience not dumb, shape the stories how you want. Hey Drake, they're not slow. Rabbit hole is still beef, I can go further, I promise. Ain't that something? B-Rap stands for bitch, and you Malibu most wanted. Ain't no law boy, you ball boy, fish Gatorade or something. Since 2009, I had this bitch jumping. You niggas will get a wedgie, be flipped over your boxes or over your foe. The other vaginal option, pussy, think about it straight in they posture. Got famous all up in content, might write this for the doctrine. Tell a pop star quit hiding, fuck a caption, won't action, no accident, I'm hands on. He fuck around, get polished, fucked on Wayne growing, he was in jail, that's conniving. Then get his face tatted like a bitch apologizing. I'm glad D-Rose came home, y'all didn't deserve him neither. From Alondra down to Central, nigga better not speak on Serena. And your homeboy needs subpoena, that predator moving flocks. That name gotta be registered and placed on neighborhood watch. I lean on you niggas like another line of walk. Yeah, it's all eyes on me and I'ma send it up the pot. Ay, put the roll label on me, I'ma get them dropped. Ay, reaching music and I won't pass the...
Final round.
Why would you mention my fiance? Wow. Like, no women, no children. What's up? Like, what we doing? You mentioned my fiance, you put a name in a song. Like, bro, she don't even listen to rap. Like, what are you talking about right now? What are we doing? I felt like, wait a minute. What is the real issue with you and marriage? So then now I gotta dig deeper into who the person is. Now I gotta dig in and see, what are y'all like? What's your family like? Oh, your dad left you at 5. Oh, I get that. He never walked you to the bus stop. You're mad about this. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
It's like, man, your mom, she never remarried. Ah, you don't even know what like family is. So of course you don't dig marriage.
Where's my sandwich? I'm so hungry.
I didn't buy you that sandwich.
Why?
Because I bought chicken salad. I'll make you a sandwich. I bought some other things.
Why couldn't you just got me that sandwich?
Because the lineup was incredible.
There's somebody, I get the picture of the actual photo that I used
Of the blackface.
of the blackface.
Right.
This was done in 2008. You don't even know that that's not right. That you there's no explanation for that to me.
So let's talk about you being Jewish real quick.
Let's do that.
Because a lot of people think that Asher's Jewish.
Right.
He's not. His dad's Jewish. He doesn't really identify. All loves to Jews, but he's not Jewish.
Yeah.
You, on the other hand.
But he wasn't there. He didn't read his portion, first of all.
You didn't have a bar mitzvah.
Come on. Are you serious?
You had a. Hold on, ladies and gentlemen. Just tell. You don't understand how big you're about to be in the Jew world. Right?
You don't understand how big.
You.
First of all, I live in an all-Jewish area, so
Where is that?
Forest Hill.
Okay.
I went to a predominantly Jewish school growing up. I definitely had a bar mitzvah in an Italian restaurant, mind you.
My lord.
Yeah.
A nice Italian restaurant?
A very nice Italian restaurant. The song of the night was Backstreet Boys, I Want It That Way.
You are younger than me.
Yeah.
I forget about that.
Yeah. And yeah, man, I was in there. I was in synagogue. I had my yarmulke on.
Hebrew school, the whole nine? You did no Hebrew school?
I cheated. I didn't really.
So you just did that? No. Your parents are nice.
Yeah.
So they let you do the bar mitzvah without having to do the fucking Hebrew school. So your mom's Jewish.
My mother's Jewish. And you know, we have great Jewish dinners like Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur.
First text message you ever sent me. Good Shabbos.
Yep, good Shabbos.
He kept it real.
Yep.
Have you gotten approached yet by like the Jewish media yet?
No, I haven't gotten approached by the Jewish media, but somebody today, who I won't mention, was like, you know how big you're gonna be? And I was like,
wait, was that me 5 minutes ago? I remember saying that.
Somebody's like, you know how big you're gonna be? And he's like, this has never happened before. It's like every Jew is going to just like really embrace.
Well, here's the thing. There are Jews like my dad who like cling to like the biggest reaches. Yeah. Like, you know who's Jewish? Matt Damon. I'm like, no, he's not, Dad. He's definitely not Jewish. And like people reach, and the fact that you actually identify, that's gonna be like, that's gonna be big.
Yeah, it's gonna be great.
You're doing something that I could never do.
Like, you are silent in all black issues, Drake. You really are. You are really, really silent. I don't hear about anything. You don't stand for nothing. You don't say nothing about nothing. You don't. That's just what it is. Like, you have all the platform in the world. You were so passionate back then. No, you weren't. That's number one. That's what I know. Number two, you gotta think about who a person really, really is. And it's like, okay, bang. That's why it's okay. That's why it's okay for you to take a photo like this. You didn't even know it was right. You don't even know how fully, you don't know where you stand at. Mm-hmm. You don't know where you stand at. Oh, that's why you gotta, you highlight your dad clowning like that. Oh, you run to the Memphis. Oh, I'm Memphis, Houston. That's my black side.
1, 2, 3, go.
You got it?
Yeah, go.
All right. What's up, man? Y'all already know, man. It's your boy, Drizzy Drake, coming to you, man. Whenever y'all in LA, man, tapping with my nigga, man, Don Pax, man. He got all that shit, man. Y'all be putting in your arm, he got that, man. Y'all be off that fence. It's whatever you want to do. Y'all niggas still on them 30s. You got to fuck with Don Pax, nigga. Perk 80s, nigga. You know what I'm saying? Y'all be fucking with them blue, man. Get on them reds, nigga, for real, man. Y'all know what it is, though, man. Tapping with my dog, man. You know what I'm saying? Tap into you, tap out. It's like that, you know what I'm saying? For real. Yeah.
All right, good.
Man's never been in Marquee when it's shut down, eh? Trust me, daddy.
You never related. Stop playing. Just really, I'm speaking about the character of a man. I'm speaking about the principles of a man.
Does your shirt say African Canadian?
What do you mean?
African Canadian what? Heritage Association. Aren't that anything? They're not that intriguing.
You're not that anything?
Huh?
You're not that anything or that intriguing?
No, I'm an anomaly.
Did you have trouble saying that word?
I don't know why I did.
Try it again.
I'm an anomaly.
No.
Because...
Why do you like fruity drinks?
They're refreshing. Try it.
Roche brought me the hat that I need for this stream right here. This is my alter ego. Anita McSween. Anita McSween. I'm in that bag. I will be getting drunk. Mills. Shout out to Mills.
Yo, call declined.
Embarrassing.
Call declined.
By the way, she's like getting a full foot massage, and we're just.
I know. I just felt like,
You do it. I asked, am I your type? And you said I do it. It's not funny. What's your type? Describe it.
And to the rest of you, the non-believers, the underachievers, the tweet and deleters, you guys make me sick to my stomachs, fam. Honestly, if you guys want to look in my eyes, you guys want to do something? You guys, that's what I thought. No, that's what I thought. That's what I thought. What's up, man? Y'all already know, man. It's your boy, Drizzy Drake, coming to you, man. Whenever y'all in LA, man, tapping with my nigga, man, Don Pax, man. He got all that shit, man. Y'all be putting in your arm, he got that, man. Y'all be off that fence. It's whatever you want to do. Y'all niggas still on them 30s. You got to fuck with Don Pax, nigga. Perk 80s, nigga. You know what I'm saying? Y'all be fucking with them blue, man. Get on them reds, nigga, for real, man. Y'all know what it is, though, man. Tapping with my dog, man, you know what I'm saying? Tap in till you tap out. It's like that, you know what I'm saying, for real. Yeah.
All right, good.
Man's never been in Marquee when it's shut down, eh? Trust me, daddy.
Going into the new year, I hope I could put some money in your pocket. So, all right, we'll get back to it now. Thank you.
Does your shirt say African Canadian?
What do you mean?
African Canadian what? Heritage Association.
That's the bad news. Good news is I had 16 off the bench. We caught the dub. W's in the shot. W's in the shot.
Oh, that's for sure.
Probably.
No, you're hot. Like I'm not like I just mean like I was just like a confidence booster. You're attractive. So it's obviously not like you don't have to play shy like ew, Bobby. Like I just mean like what do you think? Like what do you think?
She might dance, nice shots in my pants. Oh, Len, that's a label. She wants you with no cable.
Fuck Drake for the night. That's what she said. Get me on the camera.
Okay, explain this weekend drink you be drinking all the time.
They want to know what it is.
Okay.
It's the Honda. It's the Hondalini. We call it the Honda Civic. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. All you do, bust a can of that orange. The can is orange. That's why I say that. Bust a can of that Honda. Lots of ice. Pour it over the ice. Fresh passion fruit in there. Stir it up. You know what I'm saying? Like Bob Marley would say. Stir it up.
Okay. And what's the name of it?
Huh?
What's the name of it?
I said it already, bitch.
All right.
Not like you a thought. Has anyone ever called
Why'd
you a
you
thought?
no.
You a thought, Bobby.
Are you calling me that right now?
Kind of, yeah. You a little thotty, Bobby.
What does that mean?
It's just fun saying it to you because, like, you don't really get offended by it because you don't even really know what it means. So I can just say it to you, and like, I've never really been able to just look at someone and say that to their face.
Thank you for that compliment.
I love you, Drake.
Like current events or something. I don't know. I'm saying like things that like everyone else is pretty privy to. Seems like you're
Privy.
kind of like,
Was a big word.
it's not. It's like
It's a big word.
5 letters.
You know what I mean?
Like it sounded big.
Yeah. Who uses that word? And
Privy.
yeah, I've never heard anyone use that word before.
It's a good point.
Yeah, so don't use words like that.
Okay. Are you gonna take a
What?
sip? I'll just take it back.
What? Thank you.
Oh my God.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yes. Thank you.